How many people know what this is? How many people have been into the men's or ladies' room in here and tried to get water to come out of the sink? The Internet of Things is pervasive and continuing to go in so many different places. So hopefully I'll have the opportunity over the next 15 minutes to kind of highlight some of those ideas, concepts, and things for you. How do we work this? Does that do it? The kind of core philosophy of what I want you to walk away with is cheap sensors plus algorithms are equaling new ways to profit when it comes to retail. So if you keep that as the backbone, as the kind of the thing that's driving this conversation, I think it'll all make sense. When we start to look at what sensors are controlling, it's fascinating to me. And this is just a list of the stuff that as I was going through, which I thought was really interesting, and I'll read it, which is horrible from a presentation standpoint, but 70% of the stock market is done by algorithms. Steering in your car. I just went to the bathroom and I washed my hands, but I also did something else and the toilet flushed. I didn't have to do anything. I walked up, I walked away, and it flushed. Sensors and algorithms are at so many different places and being used in so many different ways. So again, open your mind up as you start to think about how sensors can be used, and then think about your daily lives, right? And it's broadened, and I'll cover a few of these into ways as I started to think about this going, I never thought about connecting a sensor to that. I found this graph. I don't know if you guys have seen this before. I think GigaOM had done it. It's really hard to see, but if you look at the second to last one over to the right, and just if you look at the grayscale kind of going from bottom to top, what it's trying to tell you is how far along is the Internet of Things as it relates to these different categories. 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest, and if you notice, most things are at a 4. And retail specifically, I think it says 3.68 to 4.41. We are at the beginning of this, and it's only getting bigger every single year. So let's look at some examples. How many people know who Paco is? Anybody out there? 1, 2, good. So Paco has done this amazing thing when it comes to mystery shopping. And my favorite one that he kind of came up with as he was researching how retail stores, how big department stores should function, where merchandise should go, was some really obvious things that you wouldn't know unless you were in there. How many people have walked into a mall? Everybody raise your hand. When you walk into the mall, do you ever notice that you get this breeze that kind of hits you if you're in the summertime, the air conditioning hits? And then as you walk, you transition, right? Your brain goes, okay, I'm going from outside to inside. If you put merchandise right in front of somebody right there, they won't see it. Why? Because your brain is starting to process. It's saying, okay, I'm now going from one mode to the other. So there's an optimal distance. He also noticed that if you put something too close to the front, even in that optimal distance, there's a brush effect. What happens if a woman is shopping and somebody comes up behind you when you're looking at the merchandise and brushes you from behind? You're going to freak out. So mystery shopping has kind of uncovered some of these things and helped retailers do a better job. How does that relate to the Internet of Things? Here's a $99 camera, one of the more expensive sensors that we can put up there, and you can obviously buy cheaper ones. Well, what does it do? There's a company called Prism out of California that creates a heat map in real time of the flow of traffic through a specific store. Mystery shoppers would sit there and peer from a corner and write down little notes of what would happen. Now you have it in real time. So my presentation is going to be a lot of this. If you have questions, if you want to chime in, please just raise your hand. I prefer interactive rather than me talking at you guys the whole time. So another example, health club. How many people belong to a health club? How many people have bought equipment to exercise at home? How'd that go? Good, some bad. So boredom being the #1 reason people don't really succeed when it comes to fitness at home, but videos still sell, equipment still sells. There's a company out of New York has created a bicycle. This bicycle incorporates a range of different sensors and a big monitor. And what do they do with it? You can now take live classes online. So biometric data starting to drive the interaction at the computer level. My bet is within the next year, you're going to see an enormous uptick of how many things we can do at home, whether it be health-related or fitness-related, where the Apple Watch, sensors that we have on our body or around us are starting to change the way retail is currently being done. Does it have to be in a store, or can it start to spread out and be at home or be at other facilities and things like that? How about in-store GPS? I think I see Danny back there. You're going to see a picture that will look familiar in a moment, I think. Signage in stores, critical, right? Where do we direct people? How do we move people through the store? Interesting technology, iBeacon. I actually highlighted Roximity. You want to raise your hand, Danny, if they don't know who you are? Danny's sitting back there, runs Roximity. In-store GPS has now come down in price. It's now a reality. You can actually do it in large scale. I think they just did it at CES. I don't know how many thousands of units they had. And what's interesting is the Minority Report is starting to become a reality. Now, is this style of interrupt advertising going to be the thing that we want? I don't know the answer to that. But the ability to direct people around, give them information, potentially target that with directional sound, so you have to be right in front of a picture if you're in an art museum, or pushing information on store specials or locations at conferences. iBeacon is kind of this path, and it's coming. How many people have installed or done iBeacon in their facilities? 1, 2, handful? Cool. Room automation and protection. So this is actually something I've been working on for the last few years. When you go into a hotel room, there's a handful of things that are happening in that hotel space. Music selection, right? A lot of times some of the nicer hotels will have music playing. Well, is it the music that I like? Usually not. Is the lighting set properly? Is the temperature set properly? Is the shades at the right level? Trying to automate that historically has been very difficult. You would send somebody around to adjust it. How do you gather the preferences? And then you add into that fire safety. You add into that certain rooms don't have smoking. We now have this thing called legalized marijuana. Everybody's freaking out in the hotels over that as well, right? How do you start to control these spaces? Can we do anything with inexpensive sensors? So we put together a small box that we call an ambient box, and it uses $10 worth of sensors, and it takes on and handles a bunch of these activities that would traditionally be done either by humans or a range of different services. I'm wondering if that's going to work. Yeah, cool. So this little box has a touch screen on it, and you can touch it and adjust the lighting in the room. You can touch it and adjust the volume of the music. You can touch it and adjust the temperature, all from one box. But what it also has in it are microphones, and it also has a CO2 sensor, so that it can actually monitor what's happening in the room and make automated adjustments. You can actually feed it a user's profile. Then their Spotify playlist can actually come on as soon as they enter the room, and it knows when you enter the room. The temperature can be set to the right level where I like it, so I can set my preferences for a hotel. At the same time, the box is smart enough to adjust the music up and down. So as I'm in the room and maybe my wife comes in and then my kids come in, it can actually subtly raise the music or subtly lower the music. Everything is being done locally, so nothing is being pushed out, so privacy is well protected. So again, really inexpensive sensors. Now think about, there's a fire in one room. How do I notify everybody? That big buzzing alert goes off. Is there a more efficient way to do that? And then kind of from one additional thought that I thought was interesting to try to spread this out a little bit further. We buy stuff, right? That's what the consumer economy is all about. And we're used to, some of us, renting big things. How many people own a home and have ever rented something for their house? Some of you, right? How does that start to translate when we start to look at the consumerization of everything, the Internet of Things, where we have GPSs in our phones, where we have little Bluetooth stickers that we can put on anything, where we can put a GPS device inside of a drill? How many people have heard of collaborative commerce? Cool, a few of you. So Uber, to me, plays really well into that, right? UberX, how many people have done that? Or Airbnb? How do I leverage the things that I want? What about rent a dress? Do I need to buy that fancy dress? How many people own a drill? How often do you use that drill? Once a year? Twice a year? If you're a woodworker, maybe you use it all the time. It's just sitting on the shelf. Is that the most efficient use of it? Or would it be better to go to your neighbor and borrow it from them? So as you start to backtrack how these sensors, I have 5 minutes, cool. How these sensors can change the way retail is currently being done. We have all different types of options, we have all different ways and different sensors that can be plugged in. Do you guys have any questions? Any thoughts? Any ideas? Can we brainstorm for a moment? Yeah? You just got to talk a little bit louder and everybody will hear you. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a friend, started a business in London. It's called Whip Car. The idea is you own a car, you only use it on the weekends. So the idea here, it's not Uber, it's your car and you're renting it out.
Yep.
And I think there's a startup in Boston that did the same thing. It failed. The thing is, you're wearing a dress. Do you want to wear somebody else's dress? And I guess tuxedo is a little bit of an exception, but do you see this happening at a broader scale when you have a $30,000, $40,000 car that's sitting idle, you could rent it out, people still don't want to do that?
So I think there's a timing metric here that we're looking at. And I think there's an interesting book, it's called Into the Tunnel. Has anybody read that? It was an economist, excuse me, it was a technologist out of Silicon Valley who kind of became a quasi-economist. And his prediction is 85% unemployment in 50 years. And the rationale behind that is, as the 1%, right, keeps going up, everybody else keeps getting poorer. So consumerism starts to change, and the idea of into the tunnel is that as you go into the tunnel, right, it gets darker and darker, because less people can buy TV sets, less people can buy cars. I think as society changes, we'll start to see more and more of this. And if we had this same conversation 5 years ago, you would have said Uber could never succeed. You would have said Airbnb in New York, what hotel is going to allow this from a lobbying standpoint? Right? These billion-dollar companies emerge because of the need. And I think if you notice the second bullet I have in here, how often is your car sitting idle, right? How many people drove to an airport? It's just sitting there. Do you want somebody else to drive it or not? Well, if the insurance premium change, and maybe if you know the car people, I have a neighbor who bought a car with 2 other people, and they just share it, right? So there's all different interesting ways that this starts to play out. I think from a technology standpoint, we have a tendency to see things early and we jump in, but the rest of the world isn't there yet. My favorite example of that is the DVR was tested in the 70s. It didn't become popular really till 2000, right? Today, you couldn't think of living without some type of automated recording device. Any other questions? Yeah?
You mentioned the idea of having a drill that you only use a couple times a year.
Yeah.
When I was in Seattle, our neighborhood center had a very successful tool library that had been established for 20 years, that had been going on, that had been replenished by the neighbors. Here in Denver, we're about to do the same thing
Awesome.
through a publicly funded partnership. And so my question is, when you say that the tech industry is just that much ahead of regular everyday people, is that actually true when you look at something like the tool libraries? And is it a wise idea to are we better off as a society, since you bring it up, if that kind of sharing is monetized?
I think again, society is going to determine that. Would the fear of, and let me phrase this a different way, and I only have 40 seconds too, as the price of an item goes up, a car, a home, right? There's a fear that something's going to happen to that. And I think Airbnb has been one of the first ones that have really pushed through that boundary, where I have friends in Boulder who will rent out a room to people they don't know. Right? That's about as intimate as you can get. Giving your car to somebody else probably isn't as intimate. I think technology has a tendency to follow trends, if you will. So a lot of those trends are kind of human. The desktop, right? We think of our desktop for our computer. And the computer just helps us amplify that and make it go to a wider audience. But tech tries these things, and the rest of the world isn't ready for them at that moment to go big scale. So Seattle, that neighborhood, was ready for it, as where potentially Denver is or is not. And it'll be great to see what happens. You guys have been awesome. Thank you.